Psychotechnology's love. Yes, that's the best one we've ever done. Guys, this episode, Elliot and I are together in person. I'm in Australia with Elliot for his wedding, and it is awesome here. We also have with us Ron Rivers, who wrote the book Self Actualisation in the Age of Crisis, and he's the co-founder of SpiritDao. I think, yeah, okay.
It's a pleasure to be here, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so it's super cool. He's got a crazy religion that he's going to indoctrinate me into. Apparently he has different words for this, but yeah, so orienting towards the it's orienting towards the infinite. This is how you sold it to me. How do I orient towards the infinite, and like, do I even need to? Because if infinite is everywhere, like, can I just ignore it and then have a life?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is absolutely you can ignore, right? That's your choice. That's actually your divinity in the moment. But basically, so the central kind of thesis of the book and kind of the core premise that I argue and talk a lot about is the idea that cosmology and physics now kind of provide us observations that can kind of ground spiritual alternative. I think when we think about the Metacrisis and like the larger themes of our shared struggle, our shared kind of vision for transcendence, the great struggle is not that we're here, rather that we've kind of lacked viable alternatives. So the book is an attempt to kind of develop an alternative. It is in the people in the SpiritDao community, it's in the book I refer to it as a non-religion religion. But in SpiritDao, it's been called the Wisdom Protocol. Some people prefer to relate to it as a religion. So it is all of the above and none of the above. But to your core question of why do it, I would argue that at the kind of root of the crisis is our available frameworks of meaning and value, right? But below coordination, it defines the why around who we are, how we direct our focus and energy within a moment, and how we perceive others. And I think the orientation of those that kind of I should say the orientation alongside the infinite as opposed to in opposition to it, as let's say for example some of our inherited narratives of spirituality might prefer. Ultimately, it's about kind of freeing the present from the influence of the past. And how do we do that? How do we frame ourselves so we're most free to act within the immediate present?
So it's like letting go of the past, so like a Hakuna Matata essentially.
I would say, well, we could make it that high level, and I appreciate that. Hakuna Matata is the way, but I don't think. I think Hakuna Matata might be a little bit of an internal escapism. That is to say that it is. Look, at the end of the day, I would argue that our moral and material interests are inseparable, both because of the physical nature of reality, as well as just our truly recognizing the latent divinity of the other. So if we're serious about kind of transforming society, a core thesis of the book, a central kind of message that I kind of put out there is we have to bind spiritual renaissance to systemic reformation. It cannot be enough just to do one, and like spiritual renaissance in itself is not enough, especially in terms of like collective elevation. And systemic reform, there's plenty of that going on today, but the challenge is it's kind of constrained within the systems and institutions kind of governing our lives in the immediate present. And so that is not enough, because it's not going to happen within institutions that are the cause of the crisis. And we can kind of pull those. There's many threads we can kind of pull on in that direction.
Okay, so let me bring it down into like more like, so I'm like new to your religion. I'm new to our religion.
Thank you.
So like, I guess like what should I do? Like, should I?
How do you practice this?
Yeah, like how do I marriage the Renaissance thing you said?
Yeah, wonderful. I think let me give you to better understand like how you practice it and how you embody it. Let me kind of ground what it is, just so it provides some context. So cosmology and physics over the last decade have kind of gone through this, call it a crisis of cosmology. It was really a renaissance, right? What we've essentially learned is that what we once believed to be static laws of the universe, static principles of the universe, so like, for example, like the gravity or strong and weak nuclear forces, right? The laws of the universe that have, like, for the last 100 years plus, kind of what we've based all of our hard sciences around, we believe that they were immutable. They could not change. What we now understand is they did in fact change. That in the original kind of epoch, what we call the Planck epoch, which is the initial moments of the universe, the universe was in fact a superheated unified whole. So it was one thing that as it cooled began to separate. Why that matters is because spirituality and our orientation of our beliefs have had an outsized systemic influence on global society. And that is to say specifically, while there's obviously many spiritual philosophies we've inherited, I would argue that the salvation narrative in particular, salvation narrative being the idea that you die and ascend to heaven, that there is some sort of judgment, is a deeply hierarchical philosophy of spirituality. Spiritual hierarchies, I would argue, pave the way for moral hierarchies. And more so, I think when we think of spirituality and religion specifically, religions aren't just spiritual technologies, right? They're spiritual, political, and social technologies all wrapped up into one. And they're primarily like the challenge is that these were philosophies and practices developed for people who were either Bronze or Iron Age individuals, right? They had a time experience so vastly different than ours, and so vastly kind of foreign to what we experience in our daily lives today. So I want to emphasize from the start, right? The creation of an alternative is not a critique of anyone who's inherited spiritual philosophy and embodies it, right? Or who has chosen a direction in general, but rather that as institutions, like, and we can compare any of the salvation narratives, right? Their texts have a lot of brilliant wisdom, but their texts also have very clear mandates for war against the other tribes, right? So it's inseparable. Like when we think about like salvation narratives, you cannot have all of the brilliance and the infinite and the good and that stems from them without also having the fundamentalist violence. They are inextricably linked, because so long as that book is a central text, some people will embrace certain values, right? It's almost like you need, and again, not a critique against an individual, but there's like a selective hypocrisy needed to genuinely embrace them. You choose what you like, you abandon what you don't. And the challenge is, right, there's no consistency in that hypocrisy. So even amongst the sects, like certain people, and I'll use Christianity in the United States as a great example, right? There's certain sects of Christianity or certain churches that are open and loving to people, let's say, from the LGBT community. There's others that are proactively trying to strip their rights through the government, right? So, and that's all within all of it is justified by the text and the interpretation. So a little off track, but the nature of reality, the idea that things don't change, or excuse me, the thing that cosmology and physics now tells us that nothing about the history of the universe has ever not been changing. And there's several ways to kind of go about this in modern physics and cosmology. I specifically write about the idea that we've observed, the groups of physicists have observed radiation in the cosmic microwave background. So that's like the big map of the universe, the farthest we can see out, like radiation. And they've observed radiation that's older than the universe, right? So how can that be? How can something we observe be older than what we understand to be the total length since the initial singularity? Now, there's two potential kind of trajectories we can imagine, right? One is that we don't know the actual age of the universe. Sure, that's possible. But at the same time, we kind of inherit this moment, and collectively, physicists kind of agree around the age of the universe. So we had to say, okay, well, maybe if all of these people agree on this, maybe that's a good starting point. The other alternative is that maybe there wasn't a single universe. Maybe there are, in fact, multiple universes, right? And this theory's kind of been exploring a lot of different directions. But I would argue that if there are, in fact, other universes, what I would say sequential universes, so not multiverses, like not many at once, but rather there's a single universe. But before this, there was one prior. After this, there'll be another. And those in physicists, for example, like Lee Smolin argue that they may even have like properties of the other. So it's like a parent and a child. You pass some of your traits on to the child, but not all of them. So these universes might operate under similar but different fundamental laws of nature. Now, to kind of get to your point, Daniel, like, why would you orient with the infinite? Well, there's kind of two when if you consider sequential universes, right? Like we can never measure, at least in our present state of being human, measuring another universe is so far beyond our capacity, right? Like it might as well be, we have no way to do that. We're so infinitely small in this one universe. How do we possibly measure another? But I would argue that that doesn't absolve us from having to choose a direction, right? So in the book, I choose a direction. I say, there are sequential universes, making the material nature of reality infinite. It is only never present now, like we inherit it. And this also aligns with quantum physics, the probability wave kind of collapsing upon itself. And here we are, right? Past is inaccessible, future is always unknown. So the question then becomes, if that's the nature of reality, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for who we are? What does that mean for our practices in daily life? And from there, I developed kind of two core principles. And obviously, guys, interrupt me as you see fit. I get excited about this stuff, as you can
No,
tell.
I'm like, oh, this guy knows what he's talking
you weren't-
about. I need to shut up and listen.
Yeah, if you didn't like talking about it, you wouldn't be here.
Yeah. So yeah, I make two kind of core claims about how we ground our spirituality. So like when you think about the non-religion religion, how do you ground it? The first is by far the most provocative, is I claim there's in fact a single truth. And when I say a single truth, what I mean is that it supersedes, it is above both objective truth and subjective truth. Subjective truth being our lived experience, right? That is very real. It's very real to us. It's very real to other individuals. We recognize that as good and whole. And objective truth being, these are things that I can measure and share with you, and you can measure and say, oh yeah, that's accurate within the moment, right? So this is accurate. And the single truth is not intended to be a war on syntax, but rather to recognize that the only universal commonality, the only universal constant is in fact change. In an infinitely material universe, we exist in a permanent state of transmutation, right? And you inherit a moment, and here you are. But from there, so change being the single truth is one of it identifies one of the two observable infinities. I argue that there are, right? That's the universe itself, which is infinite. Now, that in itself is not enough for like a revised spiritual project. So we bind it to the relational universe. And this is the idea of like, this is nothing new. This is Vedic, Hindu philosophy, to some extent Buddhism. The idea that the three of us are unique conscious coordinates, right? Each of us occupy a space that no one else can. But at the same time, we're a single happening experiencing itself from three different perspectives. In this specific scenario, literally across the world, which is super exciting, right? Like we're on two different coordinates of the planet, experiencing itself in one moment. And so in a relational universe governed by the single truth, I argue that there are two observable infinities, the universe itself and human imagination. And the alignment of those two within a moment represents divinity. So let's expand upon that for a sec. Why do I call them observable infinities? Well, human imagination and the universe are two things that can only be defined by themselves, right? Everything else, much of our observations in the world, we can observe, we can put a definition on it. However, those two things, as far as our collective knowledge tells us in the immediate present, we can only define them. Our imagination, if I asked you what your imagination was, you'd give me an answer. It may or may not relate to mine. It wouldn't make it any less valid or real, right? The universe itself, we recognize now in physics that our observations, one of the core failings of physics in the past that I think is now kind of moving beyond, is that any of our observations here, we cannot universalize them, right? Our observations are local. So like everything from like, and not every physicist would agree, but I'm about to say, but I would make this argument. Even things as constant as the speed of light likely act differently in other aspects of the universe, given its vastness, right? So everything we observe has to be kind of considered a localized system. And so the question then becomes, right, in terms of practice and expressing, spirituality, how do I as an individual most frequently align the observable infinities? And then equally important, how do I help others do the same? In this kind of context, we redefine self as well, right? So I argue that the definition of self is most accurately described as the relationship between an individual and their circumstances within a given moment. Because the moments we inherit, the circumstances we inherit, bind our access and agency. They bind our imagination. They bind all of these things to a specific kind of trajectory, a specific set of, let's say, inherited priors. And of course, as we bring our awareness, and we'll get more into that in a bit, but that's part of our...
Yeah, I'm starting to get this. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
So as we bind our, if we recognize that, then like a large part of that too is like if I recognize you as equally divine as me, which I do, right? I think you both have consciousness, you have that spark of the infinite, right? We're both within infinity. That is to say, within it being fractional, incomplete, right? In the opening chapter of my book, I write that the alternative is incomplete. This is not like meant to be something that doesn't transform over time, but also of it, possessing an aspect of that infinity in your imagination, right? That's that infinity coming, becoming real in the moment. I think when we align the observable infinities, it's when we're most godlike. We bring the new. So a large part of that, and that redefinition of the self, from there we kind of build upon it, right? We develop core values to kind of support our alignment and orientation with the infinite. I would argue that in a relational universe governed by the single truth, any direction of focus and energy is an act of becoming. So the question is, how do we maximize the individual's awareness? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just feeling like I want to pause and reflect where you've gone up so far. Just because I think that the audience
That's a
might,
lot.
might need some, might need some help there.
I'm following, but it is a lot.
Yeah, and then like kind of like catch up, because like you sort of like set the foundation, like the philosophical foundation, and then you're about to go into practice. So this is I think a good time to stop to just like reorient. So I want to reflect back to see if I've got it. So it's like, it's funny because as soon as I got it, I'm like, oh, it's orienting towards the orienting towards the infinite, which is like the thing that you said at the beginning. So you're saying like essentially like everyone's born into specific circumstances and that are limited, including like our current universe. And you're wanting us to orient towards like the real truth of nature, like the real truth of existence or something, or whatever the universe is inside of, as something that's consistently changing. And so like when you take people that are within their own frames and you start to orient them towards like these larger frames that are infinite, you get this expansion inside, which for humans, the infinite of the universe would be the imagination.
Yeah, well said.
You said it better, but
but you're picking up what I'm putting down, so I appreciate it. And you mentioned one thing that I thought was really good, Daniel, that I didn't even mention, but I think is actually a chapter in like kind of the grounding book, which is birth lottery and event chains. And I think when we think about like the why, like why would you create an alternative? Like why is it even necessary, right? Why is it not just enough? And I think and I think we kind of briefly chatted about this prior, but a large part of like, let's say statistically today, right? Like if you're born in abject poverty, you will remain in abject poverty your entire life. That's just statistically accurate for the global human population. The challenge is that is a policy choice, right? That is about the constructs that we've created and surrounded ourselves with. So in many ways, the spiritual renaissance is about kind of taking back the power that we've given our creations over us. We've built these things up. We've built these creations, religions, economics, laws, and we've given them this naturality, right? We think they're like almost of nature, but they don't deserve that neutrality. That's not, they don't deserve that power. But the challenge is that when you have hierarchical, for example, visions of spirituality, in many ways, it kind of is a self-reinforcing cycle. It's like the divine right of kings was justified because, for example, like the populations at the time believed in an omnipresent, like a third party creator, right? That came and did this thing,
change.
and then exactly, and well said, didn't change, was static, right?
Yeah.
And I think nothing about our observations of the universe support that, right? So I think when we orient, and you mentioned in many ways, I think this is a nature-based spirituality. It's like Terence McKenna talked about an archaic revival. The difference being that it's not indigenous wisdom as in place-based nature like Earth, but rather cosmic wisdom. In modern day, like our observations, what does it tell us? Yeah. And I think, especially in the context of like AI, quantum computing, like the knee of the curve that we're at now, we're going to see this genie open up. And I think to your point, orienting with the infinite, the more we can get people on board with like, oh, that's actually the nature of it. That's actually what I am. And maybe all of this is kind of just a preconceived notion of what I've been kind of fed, the more powerful we become. And I think, at least in my personal perspective, that freeing the latent imagination is such an immense part, because I think about like the three of us and how I express gratitude to be here in this moment, but more importantly, to be able to talk about these things, to have the freedom and agency and even just material security to be able to do this stuff compared to the vast majority of humanity that just cannot, right? They're kind of stuck in these perpetual sustenance cycles. So it's like, what happens when we have 90% of humanity, 98% of humanity who's able to do Imagineering, right? Who's able to participate in the most advanced form of work? What happens to us then? I mean, that is exciting to me, because right now it's a relatively small portion of the population, primarily in like Western industrialized countries,
Yeah, I like this. It's I just want to like contrast it, because the monotheism that I grew up in is like coming up here. It's like that monotheism is like a non-changing God, and you have an ever-changing God, and you've taken like the Yeah, like what you're calling indigenous, which is like let's say land-based faith, local land-based faith from like often I've seen like Mother Earth as like sort of like the object, like the place of worship, and then you've taken the actual universe itself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Makes sense to take the biggest bucket that you can perceive, which includes like the indigenous land base. Your bucket's only so big when you don't have writing technology. And then
Well
when
said.
a bit bigger, you get a bigger bucket, you get a bit bigger, you get a bigger bucket.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to take a bigger bucket.
Yeah.
Like, you could be like seafaring, like ocean-based spirituality for someone who lives on the ocean a lot.
Right.
Because that's what they see all the time. The waters, the mystical waters of the ocean and the winds control their life a hell of a lot more than
Right. So this is what we see.
Yeah.
The
Yeah, I mean, and one thing I want to mention, because you've used the language, and I just want to emphasize, at least the way like I've kind of framed it. Now, I want to, there's kind of two core points. I should mention up front, the book belongs to SpiritDao. So just so you're aware, the legal rights for the book and 100% of the profits the book has ever made is gone to the community. And the intention is that it evolves alongside the community. But I am very big. I'm like, there's nothing to worship here. So I want to emphasize that this is not about worshiping or obedience, as I think many historical spiritual narratives have kind of had baked into them as like means of like political and economic technologies. There's nothing to worship outside of like your own power, your own creative power, like your alignment with the nature of infinity as it is. So it's less of a worship, but more of an orientation of practice. And that like, how can you most fully express your divinity in that moment? How can you most fully align the observable infinities? To do that. So I don't want to, not that I'm saying you were saying this, but I just want to emphasize, I am not suggesting anything to worship. I don't think, worshiping the universe, I don't necessarily know. I think it's an action-oriented philosophy, and that's where that kind of systemic project comes into play. Because if you genuinely embrace it, it kind of creates a restlessness in you.
Yeah. Okay. Let's start to bring it down. When I just to like clarify, when I said worship, I meant as in the thing that religious people do, versus like the I think there is coercive worship, and there's like non-coercive worship, and there's all that stuff. But it's sort of like just as like a general thing. When you're doing religious stuff, you're worshiping, and which may not be accurate, but for the words, and then the things that are really important to religion that you don't want to disrespect would be sacred.
I think the sacred, most of them have like a very common theme, right? I don't think, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah, but they're all things that are like, this is important to us, and if you do it and if you do bad, if you disrespect it, then that's you're violating our sacred whatever artifacts or tenets or whatever. Okay, so this is cool, because there's another insight also that I just want to share. So when you're putting this as the place, you're essentially like Vervaeke talks about domicide, where like these people had a home, and then it got destroyed, and they've been moving around. It's interesting. It's like your domain now, like your home is the cosmos. And so you're kind of like orienting towards that, where it's which is interesting. And then it's like you creating all this space, so that everything that exists within this space that is changing is within the purview of the religion, which is what you're calling imagination.
It's one and the same, right? I think the imagination is an expression of the infinite nature of the universe. It's just it itself kind of coming through your fractional embodiment, as it is mine, right? And the question is like, I think it's easy to like relate. All of us, like, there's many words for it, right? The flow state. Like the idea is like when we're doing things that like deeply align with our passions, that deeply express our imagination, it's almost like the work is effortless. Right? We've all done work that is not effortless. We've all done work that like is work, and it's like, this sucks, I don't want to do this, right? Like, and we've all done work that's effortless, that you could do it forever and stay in that state forever, and you could be the most productive you've ever been, right? Happy, to be there and engaged. And that's the ideal. Is like, how do we kind of maximize our potential to do that? Because that is the greatest expression, I think, of our spirituality, and more importantly, the greatest reverence we could give to life. The greatest reverence we could give in the moment is to collectively elevate the most amount of people to do that, in the component. One interesting thing that I would love your perspectives on, both of you guys, is death. So I would make the argument, I'm not going to go deep into it, but I do make the argument that all religions essentially answer three core questions: doubt, desire, and death. So at the like, many people will call religions,
Add like, where did we come from onto that list? Well, they try. They don't necessarily succeed, but they try. And where do we come from, and where do we go to? Like two things that they.
Yeah, well, where do we go to? Would probably fit under death, right? I would imagine, and
Right, of course.
Yeah. So either way, I would say that one of the things I argue is necessary, and this is probably the hardest thing. So this is probably, we have members in SpiritDao, and SpiritDao is like an open community. It's not Ron runs the show, right? I have no more power than any other voting member, but we do have like good conversations and open debates about, like, I argue that you have to give death its due. To most fully live life, to most fully embrace the infinite nature and your infinite power in the immediate present, you have to give death its due. Because if you don't, if there's always something, there's two components, right? I think the nature of whether it be reincarnation or heaven, it posits divinity after death. So you can only know God or the Godhead after the fact. You can never truly know it in the immediate present. I argue that our observations say the opposite. I argue that if the material nature of reality is in fact infinite, and we are infinite, then the greatest expression of our divinity can be done now. And part of that is also, it's a bit of, and again, I want to say this with a preface, and it's not a critique on any individual. This is just a philosophical critique. I think it's a bit of escapism. It's the idea is that, like, if I do the thing now, and I think the problem is, and this is an argument we've had in our community that I'd love your perspective on, is, let's say, for example, you believe that reincarnation is a cyclical thing where you are, for lack of a better term, put in your position to, like, learn a lesson, right? Maybe your karma wasn't that great in the past. Now, I've made the arguments that historically that was a philosophy that made sense. Let's say, for example, in in what is now India, 5,000 years ago, you're a sustenance farmer. Life and death happens so quickly around you. You have no social mobility, and I mean this in the most, like, absolutely no way to be anything but a sustenance farmer if you're born farming coconuts in that village, right? That's what you're going to do. So it's a very powerful philosophy to orient yourself to a good life in that moment. Today, if we believe in, let's say, for example, like the intentional reincarnation, you're put here for a thing, then we have to say, well, then we are the gods, because this is all systemic choice. It's a systemic choice to go drop bombs on, we've been, let's say the United States, for example, I mean, this is the best example. We've been in perpetual war for 25 years. How many children have we killed? How many lives have we destroyed? So, I find it very hard to swallow that you're telling me that child, who I would argue is a tongue-tied prophet, right? This is latent divinity who's yet to express themselves, that they deserve to be in that position. That's my personal stance, but I love alternatives, critiques, etc.
Wait, what? Okay, yeah. So let me go back.
Sorry.
You're saying systemic choice.
Challenging question.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot. You dropped a lot, like did a whole thing. So the systemic choice, I think, is I don't love that, because it implies that there's a choice. There's a systemic choice. And I don't think people are choosing that. I think it's I think they're, like, it's an emergent property of our choices, sure, but that doesn't mean, I mean, probably, but that doesn't, like, people don't want that.
Some people do, though, right? Like, they vote on it. They vote to go to war. So, like,
they vote to go to war, but they don't vote. They don't vote to drop the bomb on the kid, right? Nobody.
But it's indistinguishable, right? Like, there's no.
I can distinguish that. I can tell the difference.
Definitely the obfuscation of causal patterns. So
yeah.
So it's easy to think I voted to protect my country, and harder to think I voted to murder a child. And there's a reason why we create that obfuscation, because we'd get a lot less done if we were too busy worrying too hard about murdering children. And we probably also might kill a few less children if we worried harder about it.
Yeah. The other thing, the thing is though, like, I'm tying this back to like the Metacrisis, essentially. So you're talking like the Metacrisis, like I think the language that is used in our circles is it's coordination problem, and you're saying it's not. You're saying the coordination problem is downstream of these, like, deeper ideas, orienting, deeper orienting.
Yeah, I would say I think the coordination problem is very much a part of it and a very significant part of it. But I think what informs our coordination problem is the available frameworks of meaning and value that we embody as individuals.
Right. And so like this is sort of like the crux kind of the religion is it's the practice around the embodiment of the frameworks of the individuals. And so for me, like this is why I'm pushing back on this one is because like I'm like this framework that you're using right now, I think it's a framework is kind of like it doesn't resonate with me. It feels like part of the problem, right? Like the framework of that we the like acknowledging we the US, let's say NATO, right? Like so that we can all be part of this. NATO's dropping bombs on children. Like yeah, technically like I'm part of that, but like this isn't something I want, and like legitimately I've searched my heart and I'm powerless to do anything about this.
So far as you know.
Yeah, like I choose not to do this, and it hasn't made any difference. So maybe I'm doing something unconsciously, or I'm making conscious choices that result in stuff, for sure. But I guess what I would say is like, do you have a framework in which I can use where I can, like, I want to absolve myself of guilt in some way, because it's not, because like it's genuinely like it's involuntary for me to do this. But that doesn't mean I want to absolve myself of all guilt in the sense that I am part of these systems and I can make better choices. And so I guess like I'm looking to you as a spiritual guide of my new religion that I'm here for the episode. What frameworks can I use to like deal with that, like to deal with that guilt and to deal with the choices, and not just like the guilt as the feeling, but also the guilt as like the action and the culpability and the change that's needed in society.
I'm going to dive into that.
And is that the right question?
I want to make one quick preface, which is essentially my intention is not to have you embody guilt. This is not a heavy guilt kind of thing. My intention is to push the recognition that whether or not it was you, the idea is that collective humanity, or those with the power to do so, are choosing to do these acts. They are choosing, let's say, for example, in the United States specifically, right? Which the United States is an example I use a lot, not because it's not any better, but it has an outside systemic influence. Like the US hegemony is global hegemony, right? And the US, for example, promotes a single vertical of property and contract. So everything falls under this kind of single vertical, which is why weapons are for profit, right? Is why medicine in the US is for profit. Now, the US is a bad example of that because there's plenty of other nations, but the intention is not to have you embody guilt, because I understand it's out of my power. I've never been part of the military. I'm not dropping bombs, right? I don't allow that guilt but how about this? While I might not embody personal guilt about it, it doesn't diminish my awareness. And so this is to your question. So how do we transcend that, right? Because everything around us doesn't give us the option to. So that's where I believe that kind of the religious component comes into. So the first is, we embody, given the foundation that we've set, there's core values I develop in the book. The acronym is Reframe Courage. It's relation, equity, flexibility, restraint, awareness, minimalism, enthusiasm, and courage. And the argument is through our personal practices, which I kind of detail, those core values better align your capacity to act within the moment. They bring awareness to your moment, and they bring awareness to your capacity to redirect your focus and energy within any given moment. So the greater awareness you possess of that in a moment, the more powerful you are, right? I think oftentimes when you think about like attractors, right? Like we sombrero, right? We start falling down, we're in this mix, right? I spent 8 hours today writing software, right? So I was in that mix. That's all I thought about. It becomes, I don't have to redirect my focus and energy, but the moment I take a breath, I come up. Now from there, and this is to your core question, right? Those core values, I make the argument that if we embody these core values, specifically relation, which is our recognition of the divinity of the other, right? You and I are a single happening, right? The universe is only ever a momentary totality, and whatever framework of time we put that in, whether it be a picosecond, year, etc. If we genuinely embody those core values, that's where the 8 dignities come in. The 8 dignities are our spiritual systemic project. So a large part, and the 8 dignities are food and water, housing, healthcare, education, information, communication, transportation, which is and energy, right? So my argument is that if we can, as a collective, unbind rights to those verticals from the state, make them global public goods, so that we transfer wealth in human society. Because today, the primary transfer of wealth is dynastic wealth. You are as wealthy as the parents you were born into, which is completely out of your control, to societal wealth. You're born the most advanced period ever in human history, and you should have a slice of that so you can imagine in your own direction, because we want to create a culture that everything is subject to challenge and change. Nothing is sacred. We should constantly be challenging and constantly be imagining, constantly demanding different alternatives and permutations. So through the systemic project of the 8 dignities, that's how I think, to your point, how do we get around the guilt? Well, we work towards the alternative. We have a vision to do that. And then more importantly, our spirituality binds us to it and justifies it. And then, in SpiritDao's case, is a 501c3 religious nonprofit, which is the ideal fundraising vehicle in the United States, right? So this is like kind of the direction we're doing. So this is how I would argue you embody that guilt is an action orientation. So it's not. Go ahead.
It's a ground, like, I think the way we use it is it's a ground up religion. So like a lot of religions are, I'm the priest, I have they're like city religions essentially are, I'm the priest, I have the truth that was inherited to me, and I'm going to pass it, I'm going to tell you what it is. And you're saying, no, there's a truth inherited to you, like your godliness, your truthness is inherited to you because you are the universe, and you are the universe knowing itself. And here are like the principles and like here is the principles and tenets, so that you can orient towards the rest of the universe and the rest of humanity and the structures in a way to like fix these problems.
Yeah, well said.
Nice. Yeah, this reminds me of Alan. I think you mentioned Alan Watts. I was just listening to, he was talking about how, like, when kids are born, we should just be like, we're playing this game and here are the rules, versus like, you have to do this, or you're bad if you don't do that. It's we're all humanity is playing this game.
Yeah, I think I'm a big fan of Alan Watts. Alan Watts has a very, I don't know if you guys would agree with this, but I almost feel like a Taoist kind of perspective, where there's much of it where it's like, it is what it is, here you are, and it's kind of like there's nothing to be done. But again, I made the initial statement in the beginning, like I believe that like our moral and material interests are inseparable. I don't think there's a dividing line between those. I think our changes are just merely an extent, our creations are an extension of us, right? They're an aspect, they're our divinity brought forth, they're our godlike, brought forth. And the problem is, over time, they become kind of calcified in their service. And I would even make the argument that like any system we create deviates from its purpose, its intention from the moment of its creation, kind of two distinct paths, right? The first is, it's.
I want to name a concept that has swung through me recently.
Yeah, please.
POSIWAD, POSIWAD. The purpose of a system is what it does.
Yeah, well said.
It's very, very dangerous. Like, the purpose is not what it says it does or what it intends to do. It's what it actually does.
Yeah, and Elliot, to your point, right? Like, I think any system we create, like the moment it begins being used, it starts to deviate from its purpose, right? But then we also have to take into account what were the values embodied by its creator. So, for example, like our core value of equity, like that's belief in fairness in our both personal but also systemic relationships, right? And there's ample evidence throughout the world, but I'll use the U.S. specifically, right? Of like the distribution of advantage is unequal. There are laws that favor in-groups over outsiders. And that I believe has a deeply historical spiritual context. Our dominant religions today are tribal religions. They were about the favoring of the in-group at the coercion or conversion of the out-group, right? Maybe Judaism a little less militant than Islam and Christianity, but it has a history of military, right?
Yeah, Judaism is very it's literally a tribal religion. Like we say the tribe of Israel, and like there's no obligation for, like, we don't convert other people because like go out to convert them, because like, oh, if you're not part of the tribe, then there's no point, like it's not your religion. So like, what does it matter to you? Like,
there's definitely
you don't have to do it. It's our covenant with the universe, and like other people can have their own, and like
there are a couple of conversations around the developing shape of a religion, and Judaism itself does talk about it. Like historically, there was if you're familiar with the Abrahamic story, there was the Egypt moment, and then there was the leaving Egypt and like wandering the desert sort of era, and then there was the arriving at Israel, and then there was like prophets, judges, and kings. Like there was prophets, kings, and judges. Don't quote me on that. But there was this organizing away from tribal into these other ruling structures, which is like the development of like away from a tribal, like a desert traveling to a like
nomadic
ruling societal, like a king type structure. Like this is like it's in the extended road because Judaism kept incredible records over long histories, including legal records, including all sorts of things and discussions and conversations. There's but it describes the change from this type of religion to that type of religion, like growing up of the religious structure, which is like Buddhism has done it as well, although they talk about it a bit less. They've also like developed from the polytheistic to the monotheist to the non-theistic, like the Hinduic sort of structures were there, and the Buddha and Buddhism kind of grew out of that one, and then he preached in sort of the tribal way. He had like a whole band of monks, and then it looks very different today than it did back then.
Yeah. I think one of the most fascinating things about Judaism for me, to your point, is Hebrew, right? Is the language, is the fact that you bound a language to a religious and spiritual practice. I mean, what an immense historical advantage,
right? In an era where most people couldn't read it, right? Absolutely.
Exactly. I mean, just immense. I mean, it's such a fascinating kind of component. But I think again, there's a lot of like really fascinating and brilliant things that come out of historical spiritual narratives. I think my main kind of challenges we've kind of expressed in different iterations is, tribal religions by their nature and just by the hierarchical kind of component of them, they essentially prioritize, I would argue, like self-assertion and competition in many ways as the primary like realization of our desires, as opposed to coordination, right? Which all of us, if you're in the Metacrisis space, I imagine, and you two, I imagine, are much more familiar with like the language of the liminal space. I am admittedly not. But we understand that like if we say it's a coordination problem, we understand that like that can't be rooted, that has to be rooted in cooperation, right? But that's not rooted in self-assertion. Those are two I would say two views in opposition in terms of kind of how we organize ourselves. So yeah, just a note there.
Sure. The candle. How do you make a candle in the wind will blow out, but a bonfire in the window and blows stronger. There's something that a candle has that can get blown out, but a bonfire doesn't get blown out so easily. There is something of so if you have a group of people and you have one person who strongly asserts themselves, you have a pretty weak group because everyone's like backing down and you have this one strong person. If you have a whole bunch of people strongly asserting themselves, you're not necessarily coordinating better because you actually have more ego, more challenge, more battle, more breakdown, but you have like a bonfire, you have like more fire going on that is like a more powerful group. Like a good group is one where difference is permitted and encouraged. A bad group is one where difference is crushed. And so what you actually want out of coordination is the permission for more people to be brighter, everyone to be brighter lights themselves, as opposed to like we all agree to like a neutral coordination system.
No, I agree with you, but I agree with your conclusion. I would push back a little bit on like how you got there, because I think to your point about like, I agree, like, and I think it deeply aligns with my point earlier. Like we want a reality of constant challenge and change. Like that's got to be the ideal in orienting with the infinite, because that's the nature of reality as it is. I think the challenge is if like self-assertion is like the root of like zero-sum games, right? So we want to create these infinite games where it's like win, 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 and we can kind of distribute things. When you have, if let's say, and this is like a large, like if we were talking like Metacrisis, right? This is like at the root of the Metacrisis. Is like all of our games are these zero-sum games. There's a clear winner and loser in economics, right? Which is, how about this? In the world today, the highest form of cooperation is transaction. It is the most frequent interaction you have with a stranger. It is the most frequent interaction you have with another is to transact. And in any transaction, right, the attempt is to maximize inputs while minimizing outputs, right? I want to give the least and maximize my own. So when you have, I mean, this is.
Keep going. I'm going to say that depends, but keep going.
Well, I think when we can think about like, so in the note of, let's say, systems, right? Like, these are what the laws governing society today support. Like, this is like the ideal, like we can say it depends in terms of like two individuals. But when we talk about the systems governing our relationships with others, right? Which is what law does. Like, law and politics is the governing of relationships, as is economics in a very specific form, right? And the challenge, right, with I would say with the larger Metacrisis is that like the systems today reinforce a very specific kind of person succeeding. Right? And the question is, how do we open that up? How do we make it so an increasingly varied amount of people can have immense success and create immense abundance in the world? Right? There's abundance today, but it's trapped. It's trapped within these silos, megacorps, mega financiers, etc. So how do we kind of free that latent abundance? So I want to emphasize that when I'm making these statements, it's from like the kind of grander organizational perspective. I'm not saying that two people cannot transact in an equitable manner, but rather that everything around us prioritizes a very specific type of transaction and action with the other, and that's what our institutions support.
All right, let me name my it depends, and we'll see if we can line this.
Yeah, do it.
So if I think of the context of like two humans in the universe, and then like barely anything else exists, we're gonna even ignore the nature of the universe in the background, right? One guy says, "I want your grain, and I'll give you some gold," and the other guy's like, "No, give me more gold for the grain." It's a very simple transaction, right? If we reshape the context of the single unified whole that you're bringing us, we have two perspectivizers in the universe looking at the gold and the grain, sort of deciding, trying to work out where it goes, right? And I don't think we are actually unified in that currently in society. I think we suck at it, but it's a very different problem to think, how do we get the gold and the grains to where it needs to go in a way that benefits the universe, as opposed to like, I'm the person over here with gold and you have the grain, and how do I get more of it? So like, unifying with the whole sounds really good, and I like to get there, and I know we suck at it, but it depends, because a system that accrues more resource for itself in the body is called cancer, right? So we don't actually like that one. We can see in the human body that we actually have big problems with it, and we're trying to work out how to not cause cancers in a medical sense, and so there's something going wrong in cancer that we want to not have go wrong in society. We want to not have go wrong on the collective level as well. That, I mean, it sounds like unifying with the whole is a good step. If we can work out what the practices are to help more people do that, that's going to be big.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's
that's my it depends. That's
yeah. Well, I mean, I think to your point, I think in that example you gave, right? In most cases, we would imagine that neither party is aware of their unification as their totality, right? They're aware of like, I got kids to feed, so I need more of this wheat, or I gotta build a door, so I need some gold. Who knows? They need some gold. But I think to your point, like the question of how is, that's where like those core values come in. That's where like the sharing space, like the liminal spaces, is how do we develop and our powers of awareness, right? I mentioned to you two when we first I guess we were off camera about practice, right? What is our practice? And I said, my practice is most deeply at home with my partner and child. Yet I feel like in many ways, I'll be candid with you guys, like this is an internal conflict of mine. Is I do a lot of traveling, I do a lot of speaking, I've been lecturing recently, and it's like, should I just be hanging out? Like, is it optimal for me to be doing this? I want to spread my message. I want to share it with others, but I've given it away, right? I haven't made a penny off the book. All of the money has gone to the community. I'm not asking for anything like that. And to me, it's an act of service. But I feel like, it's almost like the Matrix, right? Like Neo, like one day you're going to learn that there's a difference between knowing the way and in practicing the way, right? Like in embodying the way. So it's like the way for me is not necessarily being so forthcoming, being so out there. So it's like this real challenge of like, how do you spread it? And but ultimately, in my personal perspective, I feel like it needs to be done, and it's a valuable thing. And conversations like this, I mean, I genuinely enjoy, so it's fun. So it's like that's part of the fun.
Oh no, how do I do what I love more?
But
yeah, it's funny because it's like bringing me back to like my religious days when we do like deep Talmudic study. There's like
debates, lots of debates.
yeah, like right at the beginning you did a thing where you like the universe is like this, and then let me ask the question. I'm like how is it like that? I'm like, dude, like that is yeshiva. That's Talmudic to yeah.
I recently I gave a lecture at a University of South Florida's Ali program. I had a rabbi who attended my 4 hours of my lecture, right? So I was so happy he was there. I was like, oh, this is gonna be great. And he gave some really great feedback. One thing he really struggled with, I mean, it wasn't the content or the argument, but it was about God. He really felt like and my essentially argument about God is like, well, what could be more God-like than infinity, right? Like it's omnipresent, omnidirectional, it's
so in Hebrew it's called without end. Is that
thing? Yeah. So but that wasn't, and he just, and it was I didn't rebuttal or push back. He just said it's just not enough for him. Like, I guess for him, it was almost like a truly hierarchical judging figure was the idea. Like, it just gave him comfort. He was an older gentleman. So it was, it was just a fascinating critique, but I thought it was really good. And ultimately it's not going to be enough for it may not be enough for everyone, and that's fine. But again, what I'm trying to emphasize, if I was to take anything from these ideas, is like you have to bind it to a systemic project. And we'll talk more about this in LimiCon. Like we'll talk about like what that means and how that looks. But even at SpiritDao, like I'm not SpiritDao, because I am one of the primary architects, is built around this non-religion religion, but it's not necessarily the direction it'll take, if that makes sense. Like I've kind of seceded power, and I'm okay with that. Like it's not about promoting my specific vision or orientation. It's more about kind of like how do we unbind our spirituality from like all of the baggage that comes with these inherited systems? Because there's like no denying it. Like we have like most practitioners are good, but so long as they exist, there's going to be people who abuse them because the texts allow it into some kind of interpretation. So it's like, how do we do that, and how do we kind of create space around this, around orienting with the infinite in a way that makes sense? But again, full disclosure, guys, I'm fractional. I don't know anything. I write a chapter about being an authentic imposter. I'm very authentic in my imposter. I don't know anything, like I'm making these conclusions. I've done a lot of studying, but no more value of my perspective than anyone else's.
Yeah, so like your regular religious leader. I'm just teasing. But I think I think this is important to religion, is like is to like it, like we had that growing up. Not that people necessarily followed it, but the humility, it's like like the most noble people, like the founders of the religion, like Abraham is I'm dirt and ashes, right? Dirt has of having no past, and ashes of having no future. And
that's spicy.
And Moses was the best at this. He was like, I'm nothing, right? And they always have the joke like they go to the synagogue, and then everyone's saying I'm nothing, and then this new guy shows up and he's like, okay, I'm nothing, and the other guys are like, who is he to say he's nothing? like there's like status to like no status almost.
Yeah, those are games I'm not going to play, but you guys.
Yeah, no, but I think this is the game you are playing, where you're saying like you don't know, like you're like acknowledging you don't know, and you're just sort of giving your best shot. And because like it's still important to grapple with like these existential issues that we know probably are not going to have any real answers, but it's like it's still valuable to explore and understand.
I'm interested.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
To change direction.
Yeah, please.
So earlier you were talking about helping to orient other individuals towards the infinite. I'm curious about what is the practice, or how do you go about doing that?
Or did you already do that? I feel like have we been doing that in this conversation, or is there like some other more structured approach to?
I think a large part of it is this conversation has been much better. I think a lot of like, I don't know if you guys would agree with what I'm about to say, but I think a lot of it is like people aren't aware of an alternative. So a lot of just like talking about it and thinking about it in terms of, again, aligning it with like our observations of the universe, aligning it with what our hard sciences say, right? I can give plenty of quote, like, Stephen Wolfram's a great one, famous mathematician, right? The laws of physics are the way they are because we are the way we are, right? It's like our ability to perceive them is the reason they are. He talks about the Ruliad, the nature of what I call the momentary totality, right? The single truth. He calls it the Ruliad, the idea that you have all these possibilities that are kind of forming, and we experience a very specific trajectory of them, but like we know that, for example, the fly experiences an entirely different set of rules within the rule. Yeah, they're equally valid. They exist at the same time, right? But they're just a different kind of configuration. So a large part of it is just bringing your awareness to it. We hold contemplative practice every week. We've been doing it for about a year now. So it's a lot of like, how do we apply these philosophies and visions to like, and our core values, especially to our everyday practice? Like, how do we just think about the world orienting with the infinite? How do we do that? We work towards building kind of like, we're SpiritDao still in its infancy. So, you know, it's a growing practice. As more members are coming on, like we're exploring kind of different things, but ultimately, full disclosure, I'm not the best at kind of creating rituals. In the book, I suggest 3 rituals. I suggest, I do small and high rituals, right? Small rituals like meditation, visualization, 5 breaths. And then I write a chapter about customizing transcendence. And Daniel, you mentioned in the very beginning, right? What is practice? And it could be, or sorry, Elliot, you may have said like, it could be tennis, it could be whatever. Whatever your practice is like what matters. That's the alignment of the infinite. If you're in that state of joy and flow and you're really aligning your creativity with your powers in the moment, then that's the ideal. So that's a large part of it. And then it's also kind of like building the infrastructure to support that and kind of support it. That's kind of what we're doing at SpiritDao, is kind of building alternative structures. But outside of that, we're still, again, because we're in our infancy, it's a lot of just talking, a lot of thinking about it, a lot of like building small software pieces to kind of work on and kind of support our coordination. We're fully on chain. It's a completely linked DAO. We have memberships, we have roles. It's all automated, you know, so it's a pretty straightforward process, etc.
Can we ask about that? Yeah, I guess, yeah, that's psychotechno. This is actually like technically psychotechnology, right? Because you're using technology to affect people's coordination, but which is essentially like their psyche or their perceptions of what's going on in their interactions. So I'm counting this as psychotechnologies. So how does this work?
Yeah, I mean, I would say even the religion's psychotechnology, isn't it? Like,
yeah, well, the religion is definitely psychotechnology.
Oh, okay.
And I'm saying this one, I'm justifying as psychotechnology so we can talk about it.
Yeah, right on. I'll give you guys a high-level overview, but if it's of interest to you and anyone who's listening, I'll be giving like an hour-long talk about this on LimitCon, where I'm gonna like map out the technical infrastructure. I'm not gonna do that here.
Okay,
I'll give you an overview.
Yeah.
But I will, like, the whole point is if you come to that conversation, which is not this week but next week, you will leave there with like a blueprint, and I mean a blueprint to like fork our protocol, to do it all your own if you wanted to, or kind of leverage our community and our resources to kind of further your own efforts. So we'll get into that. But SpiritDao is the idea of, so I'm very big, you know, in the Metacrisis liminal space. We understand the coordination issue, and I'm a huge Web3 person. I really believe in DAOs and just like decentralized pod, like sociarchy, holacracy, excuse me. So however you like, whatever language you use, but we use pods is what we say, pods and grouping. And the idea is we have a community, and so there's only like pods are essentially small working groups. So the idea being that like it takes 3 people to start one, and you want to work on a direction. The way it would work in a DAO, and SpiritDao specifically, is you know, the 3 of us might say, hey, look, I want to do this course, or I want to produce an artifact like the graphic novel. I want to make something new for the community. And what we want to do is we want to request money for it. Here's our proposal. Here's our blueprint. The pod then puts a proposal to the community. It goes through a stage of like review. The community comments it in our collaboration hub. We use Charmverse, and it's like you have a forum you can just kind of talk to each other on. You have long form discussion. We have a very active Telegram. That's where most of our like discussion happens. So then after that, it goes to a vote. Voting members. So SpiritDao has 2 member tracks. It's like members who are just like supporting members, and then we call them verified members. Verified members go through an onboarding. So essentially the onboarding is a combination of like, it's like 3 hours. Everyone has to give the same thing. It's 3 hours. And it's like a course about the book. So it's like a central philosophy of practice. And then it's like the other half is like on our technical infrastructure. So like, here's how you use our tools. And it's a combination of self-guided learning and communal learning. So we all like, there's always like a debrief after the fact where you like connect with our community. And if you're verified, then you can vote. You can vote with our money, because we fundraise. We have about, I don't know how much is in the account now, probably around like 4 or 5 grand. So we have like money to support initiatives, and we're growing. Part of the reason to incorporate is a 501c3 is to actually like do grant funding, like actual grant funding, like get significant capital to the org to kind of support our vision. So anyway, So pods can like be eternal, like the executive pod or the onboarding pod is an eternal pod. They're always there. But your project pod may just pop up. You spin up a separate what we call multi-sig wallet. We put the funds in there, and you have the funds are just distributed via milestones. So you say, okay, Ron, in SpiritDao community, we're gonna make a graphic novel, and the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna write it. And after that milestone, we want you to release $1,000. Then we're gonna connect with the graphic designer, and we're going to get or an illustrator, and we're going to get the illustrator. And after that, we want you to release 5,000. Then after that, we want you to release the last 3 when it's ready for print, whatever the case may be, right? And of course, I want to emphasize, members are getting contributed for their time. SpiritDao, I believe, and I think many people today in the organization believe that it's a place where you kind of give more than you get. It's working towards like a shared bigness, like our vision of the 8 dignities. But I'm not like, people deserve to like get compensated for their time. I'm a big believer in that. We do incorporate that, but that's kind of like how the DAO works. And we have 3 core purposes. The first is to spread our message. Second is to build community value. So for a community like a tribe, right? And the third is to further the 8 dignities. So I envision SpiritDao, and I'll pause after this, but this is how I envision it. Doesn't mean how it'll take shape. But I envision SpiritDao primarily focusing on the first 2, message spread and community value, and becoming a fundraising and grant giver for the 8 dignities. So like giving money to people who are building public goods, typically on chain, so they're like, they cannot be like taken away, in the verticals of the 8 dignities, right? It could be in their municipality. I want to build a co-op vertical farm in my municipality. I want to build. Sorry?
Co-op for like food and water.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, and that's a good place to pause. But that's kind of like how I envision SpiritDao. But again, SpiritDao is not mine. It's ours. You know, it's the community's right now.
Yeah. So, but you're like currently, and by currently I mean like in this moment on this podcast, you're like a spokesperson for it.
Yeah. I'm obviously a large advocate for it, and a member, right? I'm a co-founding member. I'm a member of our executive pod.
You're a good
primary I mean, if it's of interest, if like DAOs and Web3 is of interest to you or anyone else, I am happy to spend time about that. Yeah, I love it.
So let's I kind of like, I feel like one of the ways to learn something is to be able to use it. So can we like use it now? What's our time? Yeah, we still got time, right? Yeah, so can we use it now? Like let's do this now. So we want to raise money for a thing that we want to do. How do we?
You want to see what it's like? Do you want me to share my screen?
Do we like?
Yeah, let's just do it now.
Members of SpiritDao, or
we have to
be members.
What's one of our projects?
So membership is well, are you suggesting? So well, let me just show you what it's like.
I think it takes a bit longer than the 5 minutes. It's not like and ask for some money. It's a little bit longer.
Yeah, if your intention is to like ask us for money, there's like a process that will take longer than 5 minutes. But what I can show you is like what some of the DAO.
No, but like take us through the process. Like we don't have to do it per se if it takes us like screens and stuff, but just sort of like walk us through.
How might we go about becoming a
So in Toronto we got Vibe Explorers. So we do like, which is very communication based. So we're like one of it's also decentralized. I'm a co-founder, but there's like a very kill the leader mentality. So I'm not a leader, I'm just a participant. And so like we want to be putting on events. So we actually applied for a grant for another thing, but like some of the events we want to put on events for the community, right? So I live in a building, there's a bunch of buildings nearby. I want the people there to vibe and get along and be able to help each other, like, you know, like more neighborly. I'm gonna need like some money for that. I'm gonna need like, I don't know, like a couple $100 just for like the time and advertisements, and to pull people in, refreshments, and to rent the room. So how do I get that? Like, let's go through this.
What would be the process?
I'm just gonna like totally brainstorm off of that idea. Like, how would I form a DAO today off that idea, right? So the first thing, there's two. The beauty of DAOs today, compared to like a year ago, is like all of the infrastructure is there. That's like, most people don't know that yet. They still think it's like kind of like, oh, it's like really, it's not. Like there's front ends for everything. It's just software you can build on top. 2 protocols is all you need. You need unlock protocol. Okay, just unlock, like a unlock protocol. That's your memberships. Okay, and you can do a couple things with those. SpiritDao does time-bound memberships. That is to say, they expire. Okay, so because we're a 501c3, every membership donation you make is a donation. It's an actual write-off on your taxes in the US. But you don't have to have time-bound. You can do permanent, right? And so you have membership. So anyone who's going to be part of your community would chip in $10, you can set the price as X, right? It can be whatever you want. Here's your membership. What does this entitle you to? Okay, so it entitles you to access to all of our events. It entitles you to governance if you want to, govern how you want to do it. And then what you would do, the second one, is you would do what's called HATS protocol. HATS protocol is, think about like a key card in an office building. It is your role. So you and I are going to be on, Daniel, you and I are going to be on the food committee, and Elliot is on the advertising pot, right? So he has the advertising thing. And what happens is money gets distributed to those individual pods, and they spin up what's called a multi-sig wallet. So there's 3 components: unlock, HATS, and a multi-sig wallet, safe. Okay, the safe wallet is, a multi-sig just means you need multiple people to sign it. So I can't take money out unless 2 other people sign off that this transaction was legitimate, it's been passed by our community. So that's what you would kind of do. That's how you'd organize it. The benefits of this is that you can create, this is what smart contracts do. You can say, okay, Daniel, Ron, like you guys have $500 for the refreshments. Here's how we're going to do it. You're going to buy those refreshments, and then you're going to submit your receipts publicly for everyone to see. The community will approve. The moment it's approved, the contract releases the money, so that you don't need like someone to give you the money. You can put it in escrow, and the contract can then release it. Same thing. Elliot wants to do advertising. He says, look, I need $500 right now because I'm going to do the creative work, and then I need $500 to print and distribute the flyers. There's a milestone, right? So we give him the 500 up front. He then demonstrates the work publicly to the community. The community signs off. They say, yes, you're good. The moment they sign off, that extra 500 in the escrow is released. So it automates what would traditionally be like asking someone for a check or something like that. In the future, I'll add one more kind of layer, and then we can pause. But in the future, as you kind of grow beyond your initial organization, you might do like unique events. So, hey, we're going to have tiered membership. But this, like, if you want to do, tiered membership can be, it doesn't have to be money oriented. It could be like, show up for our apartment complex cleanup. We're going to pick up trash. And if you show up, you get the trash badge. And your trash badge then gives you priority seating at our gala or whatever, whatever you're going to do at the game we're going to throw or whatever. And you can get local sponsors, right? Like it's very creative, but the point is it creates a highly transparent method to coordinate that can automate a lot of the repetitive functions that would otherwise like you need a human to do. So does that kind of give you a kind of high level?
Yeah. Like as you're talking about it, I'm thinking there's these other organizations that do like sponsor Friday night meals, and it's like in the Jewish community, and like they're always having to like submit receipts and like going through this stuff and all that. So you're saying like, oh, it just automates this process.
And thins it down a bit, I guess.
Yeah, and it's a great point, because one of the conversations in SpiritDao is like we should be promoting this to existing religious institutions, because much of the work they do would be like transformed by DAOs, like significant.
I got this next question. Can I use it for like outsourcing, for subcontracting?
Yeah, I don't see why. You do what's called a bounty. So like I put a bounty up. Let's say, we talk a lot in crypto terms, but you can use like US dollar as well. I'm going to do $500 US dollars, and I want someone to go to the local college for a day, and I want them to hand out 100 graphic novels. And assuming that we trust them, they're going to do it. They take the bounty, they do it, they show us, maybe they take a few random pictures of handing them out throughout the day, and you got that $500. So that's how we would incentivize work within our community that we wanted to do. In the past, here's a great example. I've incentivized social media posts. I'm not, if I could delete my Twitter, I would. I don't, because I need to spread a message. But the point being is we've put bounties to SpiritDao, like, hey, schedule 3 months worth of Twitter posts. Here's $150 that have done that in the past. So yeah, the answer is yes.
Yeah, how hard is this to do?
It's not, and I mean this. What I'm about to say, I mean very genuinely. Offline, if you guys ever want to connect and like go through it, I will walk you through the process. Give me like an hour. It's not difficult.
I'm
Take advantage of it. Yeah, please do. I'm very serious. I think the more of us who are using on-chain, like blockchain and like DAOs, the more effectively we can kind of transform institutions towards this like global public good infrastructure.
I'm not into transforming. I'm just gonna build my own.
Yeah, I mean that's fair enough. I'm actually about to release a white paper. It's about like 30 pages on the intersection of, so like professionally, I'm in like the nonprofit and philanthropy space. So I'm running an intersection on like AI, Web3, and philanthropy because there's so much immense like potential there. There's so much latent, I mean like billions of dollars of latent capital, but it's a low tech industry. So how do we kind of
Which one?
AI, Web3, and
yeah. Look, okay, let's connect, because like I was trying to build this business that was trying to do this thing, and I kept talking to programmers, and they're like, it's going to be like tens of thousands of dollars.
You do it yourself. I mean, so long as you're willing to dedicate the time to learn. I mean, it's not. It's really. I stress this. Now I do have some prior biases. I'm a technologist by trade. Right? I write software and do things like that. So it's like I find it really easy, but I promise you, I will give it to you in a digestible format. So you have my email, right? Like we can just book a time. I'll hit you up after this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally.
I'm on vacation now in Australia for a wedding.
That's true.
After that. And oh man.
Well, guys, this has been really, really fruitful. I really appreciate both of you. This has been a great
It was a solid, like, in the beginning, I was like, oh, I haven't said anything for like 15 minutes. And then, no, because he's got this. He knows, he's like solid in what he's describing. He's in touch with it. He's like, knows where he's going. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I'm less interested in doing an episode and doing actual work now.
Yeah, well, I'm happy.
Yeah, let's do this. We don't need the audience anymore.
Well, you guys are always welcome to share space with us in SpiritDao and bring your own insights, or even just partake in ours. It's a great community. We meet every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard US time. I don't know what time that is in Australia. I imagine it's like 4 in the morning. So
it's not so bad. I think it's 9 a.m. the day after.
Oh, that's kind of perfect then. Well,
yeah.
not kind of perfect.
It depends what time of year also.
Yeah.
Double time zone, like we stretch like 2 hours apart because we both have savings, right? So yours moves one, mine moves the other. So we actually, it's a mess.
It's the worst.
Right. That's why I use calendars. Yeah.
Psychotechno.